He built an empire worth billions, but lost the one thing money could never buy. For 7 years, he buried the past, convinced it was gone for good, until one winter night, in a quiet street outside a luxury restaurant, everything changed. A woman singing on the sidewalk. 3 little girls by her side. One glance and his entire world collapsed. Because sometimes the past doesn't knock, it sings. And when it does, you recognize your own eyes staring back at you. But who are they? And why did no one tell him? What follows is not just a reunion, it's a reckoning. And the answer she gives will break something inside him forever. Watch until the end. This story won't let go. Where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing how far our stories travel. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across Ethan's untouched plate. He sat alone at the corner table of Meridian, the kind of restaurant where reservations were made months in advance and silence carried the weight of old money. The mahogany gleamed beneath the warm light. The other diners spoke in hushed tones, their conversations blending into a symphony of privilege he had once shared with someone else. 7 years. 7 years since he had walked away from everything that mattered, convinced that success would fill the hollow space where love used to live. The divorce papers had been signed on a Tuesday. He remembered because it was raining, and Amelia had worn that blue dress he loved, the one that made her eyes look like storm clouds. She hadn't looked at him when she signed her name. Not once. The waiter approached with practiced silence, refilling his wine glass. Ethan nodded his thanks, but didn't drink. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city moved in its familiar rhythm. People hurried past, bundled against the December cold, their breath forming small clouds that disappeared as quickly as they came. That's when he saw her. At first, it was just a voice drifting through the restaurant's heavy doors each time someone entered or left. A woman singing. Not unusual for this part of the city, where street performers often tried their luck near expensive establishments. But something about the melody made him pause, made him listen. It was a song he knew, a song that belonged to memories he had buried so deep he thought they were gone. Ethan found himself standing, his chair scraping against the polished floor. The other diners glanced his way, but he didn't care. His feet carried him toward the window, and what he saw there stopped his heart completely. She was thinner than he remembered. Her auburn hair, once glossy and carefully styled, now fell in gentle waves past her shoulders. The same hair he used to run his fingers through during lazy Sunday mornings when the world felt infinite and they had all the time in it. She wore a simple coat, not the designer pieces that once filled her closet, and her hands were bare against the cold as she held a small guitar. But it wasn't Amelia who made his world tilt on its axis. It was the 3 little girls standing beside her. Identical triplets, no more than 6 years old, with dark hair that caught the streetlight like his own. They swayed gently to their mother's song, their small faces serious with concentration. One held a tambourine. Another clutched a cardboard sign he couldn't quite read from his vantage point. The third simply watched the passing strangers with eyes that were unmistakably familiar. His own eyes, staring back at him. Ethan's breath fogged the glass as he pressed closer to the window. His chest felt tight, as if someone had wrapped bands around his ribs and pulled them taut. The wine in his stomach turned to acid. These children, these beautiful, perfect children who looked like miniature versions of the man he saw in the mirror every morning. How was this possible? The math was simple and devastating. 7 years since the divorce. 6-year-old girls. The timeline stretched before him like an accusation. Each month, he had missed crackling with loss, so profound it made his knees weak. He moved without thinking, pushing through the restaurant's heavy doors into the bite of winter air. The sudden cold hit him like a slap, but he barely felt it. His expensive Italian leather shoes clicked against the sidewalk as he approached, each step heavier than the last. Amelia's voice faltered when she saw him. The melody died in her throat, and for a moment, the only sound was the distant hum of traffic and his own thundering heartbeat. She clutched the guitar tighter, her knuckles white against the worn wood. The triplets looked up at him with curious, unguarded faces. They had her delicate features, but his stubborn chin, his dark eyes, his slightly crooked smile that one of them flashed before quickly hiding behind her mother's coat. "Mommy," the smallest one whispered, tugging at Amelia's sleeve. "Who is that man?" Amelia's eyes met his across the small space that felt like an ocean. In them, he saw everything he had lost and everything he had never known he wanted. Fear, regret, love that had been buried but never truly died. And something else. Something that looked dangerously like hope. "Hello, Ethan," she said quietly, her breath visible in the cold air. His name on her lips after all these years was like a key turning in a lock he thought had been thrown away. The girls watched this exchange with the intensity children reserve for moments they didn't understand, but somehow knew were important. "They're yours," he said. Not a question. The truth was written in their faces, in the way they tilted their heads exactly like he did when he was thinking. Amelia nodded once, a barely perceptible movement that changed everything. The snow began to fall then, soft flakes that caught in their hair and melted on their cheeks. The city continued its evening rush around them, but in that small circle of light from the street lamp, time had stopped completely. And Ethan realized that all the money in the world couldn't buy back the 7 years of bedtime stories, first steps, and whispered secrets he would never know. The bench was cold beneath them, its metal surface stealing warmth through their clothes as they sat in the uncomfortable silence that follows earth-shattering revelations. The triplets had wandered a few steps away, drawn to a shop window filled with holiday decorations that sparkled like captured starlight. Their small voices carried on the wind, a gentle chorus of wonder that made Ethan's chest ache with longing for all the moments he had missed. Amelia stared straight ahead, her hands folded in her lap like a prayer she wasn't sure would be answered. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, as if saying the words too loudly might shatter whatever fragile truce they had found. "I tried to find you," she said, and each word felt like a confession. "After they were born, I tried calling your office, but they said you had moved. No forwarding address. No way to reach you." Ethan felt something cold settle in his stomach that had nothing to do with the December air. He remembered those early months after the divorce, how he had thrown himself into work with the desperate intensity of a drowning man. New city, new office, new life built on the ashes of the old one. He had wanted to disappear, and he had succeeded more completely than he ever imagined. "I was in Tokyo," he said quietly, "setting up the Asian division. I thought." He stopped because what could he say? That he thought running away would make the pain stop? That he thought success could fill the void she had left behind? "I thought it was better. For both of us." A bitter laugh escaped her lips, sharp enough to cut glass. "Better?" She turned to look at him then, and he saw the exhaustion etched in fine lines around her eyes, the way her cheekbones stood out too prominently in her face. "Do you know what better looks like, Ethan? It looks like singing on street corners until your voice gives out. It looks like choosing between buying groceries and paying for heat. It looks like explaining to 3 little girls why other children have fathers and they don't." The words hit him like physical blows. He wanted to reach for her to somehow take back the years of struggle written in every tired line of her body, but he knew he had forfeited that right long ago. Instead, he looked at his daughters, really looked at them, and saw what his success had cost. Their coats were clean but worn, patched at the elbows with careful stitches that spoke of a mother's love and limited resources. Their shoes were practical rather than pretty, the kind bought for durability rather than style. One of them, the smallest, had a hole in her glove that she kept trying to hide by curling her fingers inward. The guilt was overwhelming. It crashed over him in waves, each one threatening to pull him under. While he had been building his empire, making deals worth millions, staying in 5-star hotels, and eating at restaurants where a single meal cost more than most people made in a week, his daughters had been learning what it meant to do without. "Where do you live?" The question came out rougher than he intended, scraped raw by emotions he couldn't name. Amelia's hesitation was answer enough. She looked away toward the girls who were now pressing their faces against the shop window, their breath fogging the glass as they pointed at ornaments they would never own. "We have a place," she said finally. "It's small, but it's ours." He knew evasion when he heard it. "Amelia." "A studio apartment above the bakery on Maple Street," she admitted, the words tumbling out like a dam had burst. "The landlord lets me clean the shop in exchange for reduced rent. It's not much, but the girls have a bed and it's warm and it's safe. One room. For people." His throat closed as he tried to imagine his daughters sleeping crowded together, while he rattled around in his penthouse with its 6 bedrooms and panoramic views of a city that suddenly felt meaningless. "Let me help," he said, pulling out his wallet. "Whatever you need. However much you need." But Amelia was already shaking her head, her expression hardening into something that looked dangerously like pride wrapped in barbed wire. "No. Amelia, please. I have money. More than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. Let me." I said no. Her voice cut through his protests like a blade. "I won't take your money. Not now. Not like this." "Then what about them?" He gestured toward the girls, desperation bleeding into his voice. "They're my daughters too. They deserve better than." "Then what? Then having a mother who works for every penny? Then learning the value of things? Then understanding that love doesn't come with a price tag?" The words hung between them like an accusation, and Ethan realized that his wealth, the thing he had built his entire identity around, was just another wall between him and the family he had lost. The triplets had turned away from the shop window and were walking back toward them, their steps careful, on the slick sidewalk. As they approached, he heard them whispering among themselves, heads bent together in the way children do when they're sharing secrets. "Mommy's been sad for a long time," one of them said, her voice carrying in the still air. "Maybe the man can make her happy again." Amelia's composure cracked for just a moment, long enough for him to see the raw pain she had been hiding. She stood abruptly, smoothing down her coat with hands that weren't quite steady. "We should go," she said. "It's getting late, and the girls need dinner." "Then let me buy you dinner," Ethan said quickly, standing as well. "Please, just let me do this one thing." She studied his face for a long moment, searching for something he hoped she would find. Finally, she nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement that felt like the first ray of sunlight after an endless winter. "There's a diner 2 blocks from here," she said. "Nothing fancy." "Perfect," he replied and meant it. As they walked together through the falling snow, the girls chattering excitedly about hot chocolate and French fries, Ethan caught glimpses of what they might have been. A family, complete, whole. The life he had thrown away in his desperate need to prove himself worthy of something he already had. 7 years. 7 years of birthdays and Christmas mornings and scraped knees and bedtime stories. 7 years of watching them grow and learn and become the remarkable little people walking beside him now. 7 years that no amount of money could ever buy back. But maybe, just maybe, he could still earn tomorrow. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a harsh, unforgiving glow that made the vinyl booth seats look even more worn than they were. But to Ethan, watching his 3 daughters animatedly discuss the merits of chocolate chip pancakes versus blueberry, it might as well have been the most elegant restaurant in the world. Their voices created a symphony of childhood wonder that he had never heard before but somehow recognized in his bones. The smallest one, who he learned was called Emma, kept stealing glances at him between bites of her grilled cheese sandwich. Her sisters, Lily and Grace, were bolder, asking questions with the fearless curiosity that only children possessed. "Do you really live in one of those tall buildings?" Grace asked, her dark eyes wide with fascination. "The ones that touch the clouds." Ethan smiled, the expression feeling rusty from disuse when it came to children. "Not quite the clouds, but pretty high up." "Mommy says rich people live so high they forget what the ground looks like," Lily chimed in, then immediately clapped her hand over her mouth as if she had revealed a state secret. Amelia's cheeks flushed pink. Lily, that's not. I didn't mean. But Ethan found himself laughing, a sound that surprised him with its genuineness. Your mother's not wrong, he said gently. Sometimes we do forget. Emma, emboldened by her sister's questions, leaned forward conspiratorially. We make music on the street. Mommy says music makes people happy even when they're sad. Is that right? Ethan looked at Amelia, who was studying her coffee cup as if it held the answers to questions she was afraid to ask. What kind of music do you make? Mommy teaches us songs, Grace said proudly. And she plays the guitar, and she teaches us letters and numbers too, because we can't go to regular school yet. The weight of that revelation settled on Ethan's chest like a stone. No regular school. Because school cost money they didn't have, because someone had to watch them while Amelia worked, because life had become a series of impossible choices made by a woman who should never have had to make them alone. I used to play piano, he said quietly, the words slipping out before he could stop them. A long time ago. Amelia's head snapped up, her eyes meeting his across the table. You still do, she said softly. Sometimes I walk by that music store on 5th Street, and they have a piano in the window. I always wondered if you still played. The admission hung between them, fragile as spun glass. She had been thinking about him, wondering about him. Even after everything, some part of her had held on to the memory of Sunday mornings when he would play, and she would sing, their voices blending like they were two parts of the same song. As the evening wore on, the girls grew quieter, their earlier excitement giving way to the bone-deep exhaustion that came from living on the edge of survival. Emma's eyelids drooped as she leaned against her mother's shoulder, and Lily yawned so wide it made Grace giggle. We should get them home, Amelia said, but there was no conviction in her voice. Home to their one-room studio above the bakery, where 4 people shared space smaller than his walk-in closet. Come stay with me tonight, Ethan said suddenly, the words tumbling out before his rational mind could intervene. Just for tonight. The girls are tired and it's cold and… No. Amelia's response was swift and sharp, honed by years of protecting her pride and her children. We don't need charity. It's not charity. He leaned forward, desperate to make her understand. They're my daughters too. Let me give them a warm bed for one night. Let me do this one thing. Amelia looked at her girls, really looked at them, and Ethan saw the moment her maternal instincts overrode her stubborn independence. Emma had fallen asleep completely now, her small face peaceful in a way that spoke of too many nights when peace was hard to come by. One night, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. And no strings attached, no promises, no expectations. The ride to his building was quiet except for the soft sound of the girls' breathing and the gentle hum of the car's engine. When they pulled up to the glass and steel tower that housed his penthouse, Amelia's intake of breath was audible. The doorman, dressed in his pristine uniform, hurried to open their door with the kind of deference that money bought and guilt couldn't erase. In the elevator, rising 40 floors above the city they had left behind, the triplets pressed their faces to the glass walls and watched the world shrink beneath them. Their wonder was infectious, but Ethan noticed how Amelia stood rigid beside him, her arms wrapped around herself like armor against a world she had never wanted to be part of. The apartment that greeted them was everything his success had built and everything his loneliness had furnished. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a view that real estate agents called breathtaking, and he had long since stopped seeing. Modern art hung on walls that echoed with the silence of a man who had forgotten how to live instead of merely existing. But the girls saw none of the emptiness that haunted the spaces between his expensive furniture. They saw magic. It's like a castle in the sky, Grace breathed, running to the windows to look down at the city lights that sparkled like fallen stars. Look, Mommy, Emma called out, suddenly wide awake again. You can see everything from up here, the whole world. And then Lily found it, the piano, his old Steinway grand, the one piece of his former life that he had kept, though he couldn't remember the last time he had played it. It sat in the corner like a monument to dreams he had abandoned, its black surface reflecting the city lights. "Can we touch it?" Lily asked, her voice filled with the kind of reverence usually reserved for sacred things. Ethan hesitated. The piano had been silent for so long, gathering dust and memories in equal measure. But before he could respond, Amelia placed her hand on his arm. "Let them," she said softly. "It's theirs too, isn't it?" The simple words hit him like a revelation. This apartment, this life he had built in isolation, these things that had seemed so important when he was alone, they belonged to his daughters as much as they belonged to him. Perhaps more, because they were the future he had never allowed himself to imagine. Lily approached the piano with careful steps, her small fingers hovering over the keys like a butterfly deciding where to land. When she finally pressed down, the single note rang out clear and true, filling the vast space with something it had been missing for 7 years. Music, life, hope. Grace joined her sister, and then Emma, their small hands creating a melody that was more enthusiasm than skill, but somehow more beautiful than anything Ethan had heard in concert halls around the world. They laughed as they played, experimenting with different combinations of notes, creating chaos and harmony in equal measure. And in that moment, listening to his daughters make music on the piano, where he had once poured out his heart, Ethan understood what Amelia had been trying to tell him all along. Love didn't have a price tag. It couldn't be bought or earned or deserved. It simply was as constant and necessary as breathing. The sound of their laughter filled the silence that had lived between him and Amelia for 7 years, and for the first time since he had walked away from everything that mattered, Ethan allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, some things weren't too broken to be fixed. The triplets had claimed the piano as if it had always belonged to them, their small bodies perched on the bench like birds who had finally found their nest. Their fingers danced across the keys with the fearless abandon that only children possessed, creating melodies that defied music theory but somehow made perfect sense. Grace had discovered the lower notes that rumbled like distant thunder, while Emma delighted in the crystalline chimes of the upper register. Lily, the natural conductor among them, tried to coordinate their efforts with the serious concentration of a maestro. Ethan stood transfixed, watching this symphony of childhood unfold in his sterile penthouse. Each note they played seemed to breathe life into spaces that had been holding their breath for years. The sound filled corners that expensive art and designer furniture had never quite managed to warm, and he found himself remembering why he had fallen in love with music in the first place. It wasn't about perfection or technique or impressing anyone. It was about joy, pure unfiltered joy. From the corner of his eye, he caught Amelia watching too, and for just a moment, her carefully constructed walls crumbled. A smile tugged at the corners of her mouth, soft and unguarded, the same smile he used to wake up to on Sunday mornings when the world was full of possibilities they had never explored. "They're naturals," he said quietly, not wanting to break the spell, but needing to bridge the canyon of silence that stretched between them. "They get from both sides," Amelia replied, her voice carrying a warmth that had been absent all evening. Music has always been their escape. Even when we had nothing else, we had songs. The weight of that statement settled between them like a confession. When they had nothing else, the words painted pictures he didn't want to see but needed to understand. His daughters learning to find joy in melody when joy was scarce everywhere else. His ex-wife teaching them to sing when she barely had reason to herself. "Amelia," he began, then stopped, unsure how to navigate the minefield of their shared history. "I know I have no right to ask, but tell me about those years. Tell me what I missed." She was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but brittle, like ice that might crack at any moment. "The first year was the hardest," she said, her eyes fixed on their daughters rather than on him. "I was pregnant, alone, and every door I knocked on seemed to slam in my face. Pregnant women don't make ideal employees, apparently, even ones with business degrees." The casual way she mentioned her pregnancy hit him like a physical blow. She had carried his children while he was building his empire half a world away, had faced morning sickness and doctor's appointments and all the fears that came with bringing new life into the world, and she had done it alone. "I worked at a diner until I couldn't fit behind the counter anymore," she continued, her voice growing stronger, as if telling the story was somehow freeing her from it. "Saved every penny I could. After they were born, I tried to go back to work, but childcare for 3 infants cost more than I could earn. So I learned to survive on very little. We lived in a studio apartment that was smaller than your bathroom. Some nights, when the heat got shut off, we all slept in one bed just to stay warm." Ethan's hands clenched into fists at his sides. While she was choosing between heat and food, he had been closing deals in climate-controlled boardrooms. While she was holding 3 crying babies in the middle of the night, he had been sleeping in silk sheets in hotels that cost more per night than she probably saw in a month. "There were nights in shelters," she went on, and each word was like a nail being driven into his heart. "When we got evicted or when I couldn't make rent. The girls were too young to understand, but they knew something was wrong. They would hold hands and sing the songs I taught them, trying to make the scary places feel safe. God, Amelia, I'm so sorry." The words felt inadequate, useless against the magnitude of what she had endured. "If I had known." "You would have what?" There was fire in her voice now, 7 years of suppressed anger finally finding its voice. "You would have come back. You would have given up your precious freedom, your successful bachelor life?" "Yes," he said without hesitation, in a heartbeat. She studied his face, searching for lies she was certain she would find. But whatever she saw there made her anger deflate like a punctured balloon, leaving only exhaustion behind. "We survived," she said finally, and there was fierce pride in those 2 words. "We survived, and we stayed together, and we found ways to be happy. Because that's what mothers do. We survive." The piano music had grown softer now, the girls experimenting with gentler melodies that seemed to match the mood in the room. Ethan watched them, these resilient little souls who had learned to make music out of hardship, and felt something break open inside his chest. "Let me help now," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Not because I think money can fix the past, but because they deserve better than just surviving. They deserve to thrive." Amelia's spine stiffened. "I won't let you buy your way into their hearts, Ethan. Love doesn't work that way." "I'm not trying to buy anything," he said desperately. "I just want to give them what they should have had all along, what I should have given them." Before Amelia could respond, Emma looked up from the piano, her dark eyes moving between the 2 adults with the intuitive wisdom that children sometimes possessed. She had been listening, absorbing more than they realized. "Mommy," she said in that clear, sweet voice that cut through all the adult complications like a knife through silk, "is he our daddy?" The question hung in the air like a held breath. Lily and Grace stopped playing, their attention suddenly focused on this moment that would define everything that came after. Amelia's face went pale, and Ethan felt his heart stop beating for one terrible, wonderful second. Emma's whisper came so softly he almost missed it, but it hit him with the force of a hurricane. "Daddy?" The single word, spoken with such hope and uncertainty, shattered every wall he had built around his heart. Tears he didn't know he had been holding back burned at the corners of his eyes, and he had to swallow hard before he could trust his voice to work. "Yes," he managed, kneeling down so he was eye level with them. "Yes, I'm your daddy, and I'm so sorry it took me this long to find you." Grace reached out tentatively and touched his cheek, her small finger tracing the path of a tear he hadn't realized had fallen. "Don't cry, Daddy," she said solemnly. "We're here now." Amelia watched this moment unfold with an expression that was equal parts heartbreak and wonder. Her children meeting their father for the first time, offering comfort with the generous hearts she had helped shape despite everything they had been through. The night was deepening beyond the windows, the city lights blurring into stars through his tears. The girls were yawning now, the excitement of the day finally giving way to exhaustion. Emma climbed into his lap without invitation, her trust as natural as breathing, and Ethan held her like she might disappear if he loosened his grip. "We should get them to bed," Amelia said softly, but there was no mention of leaving, no talk of the studio apartment above the bakery. For tonight, at least, they would stay in this place that was learning to feel like home. As they tucked the triplets into the guest room beds, Ethan marveled at how quickly children could adapt, how easily they had transformed his cold spare room into something warm and alive. Lily whispered goodnight with the casual intimacy of a daughter who had always known her father's love. Grace asked if he would still be there in the morning, and when he promised he would, her smile could have powered the entire building. Emma was the last to fall asleep, her hand clutching his finger as if anchoring him to this new reality they had all stumbled into. And as he watched her breathing slow and deepen, Ethan realized that all his success, all his wealth, all the things he had thought made him worthy, paled in comparison to this moment. He had found his daughters, but more importantly, they had found him. Morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting the penthouse in shades of gold and possibility. Ethan stood in his pristine kitchen, staring at the contents of his refrigerator like it held the secrets of the universe. Caviar, expensive champagne, imported cheese that cost more than most families spent on groceries in a week. Not a single thing that resembled breakfast for three little girls who had probably never tasted anything more exotic than cornflakes. He had built an empire, negotiated deals worth billions, commanded boardrooms full of the most powerful people in the world. But standing there in his silk pajamas and Italian leather slippers, he felt more helpless than he ever had in his life. How did one make breakfast for children? Real breakfast, not the black coffee and protein bar that constituted his usual morning routine. The soft patter of feet on marble announced the arrival of his daughters before he saw them. They appeared in the kitchen doorway like three small angels, their hair mussed from sleep, wearing the same clothes from yesterday because those were the only clothes they had. The sight of them hit him like a physical blow, these beautiful children who belonged to him but felt like borrowed miracles. "Good morning," he said, his voice rusty with emotion and uncertainty. "Good morning, Daddy," Emma replied with the easy confidence of a child who had already accepted this new reality, while Grace and Lily hung back, still shy in the morning light that made everything seem both more real and more fragile. The word Daddy sent a jolt through him every time, sweet and sharp like the first taste of honey after years of bitter medicine. He knelt down to their level, still learning how to exist in their world, still figuring out how to be the father they deserved. "Are you hungry?" he asked, then immediately felt foolish. Of course they were hungry. Children were always hungry, weren't they? "I was thinking we could make pancakes or maybe eggs or—" He trailed off, realizing he had no idea how to make any of those things. Amelia appeared in the doorway, having heard his struggle from wherever. She had been giving them all space to navigate this new morning dynamic. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore the same dress from yesterday, but somehow she looked more beautiful than he remembered. Maybe it was the soft light, or maybe it was the way she looked at him trying to fumble through fatherhood with more heart than skill. A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, and for a moment, the woman he had fallen in love with all those years ago flickered to the surface like sunlight through clouds. "Let me help," she said, moving into his kitchen with the easy confidence of someone who had learned to make magic happen with whatever ingredients life provided. "Girls, wash your hands. We're going to teach Daddy how to make real breakfast." And somehow, in that moment, his cold, perfect kitchen transformed into something warm and chaotic and alive. Grace stood on a chair, carefully cracking eggs into a bowl, while Lily measured flour with the serious concentration of a scientist. Emma appointed herself the official mixer, her small arms working with determination that made his chest tight with pride. Amelia moved between them all like a conductor orchestrating a symphony, guiding their efforts, cleaning up spills, offering encouragement and gentle corrections. She bumped into him as she reached for the milk, and the casual contact sent electricity through him like he was 18 again and touching her for the first time. "You're burning the bacon," she said, and he realized he had been so lost watching his family come to life around him that he had forgotten he was supposed to be cooking. "I don't actually cook much," he admitted, flipping the charred strips with more hope than skill. "We noticed," Lily said with the brutal honesty that only children possessed, and Amelia laughed, actually laughed, the sound filling spaces in his heart he hadn't known were empty. As they worked together, something shifted in the air between them. Not forgiveness, exactly, and certainly not forgetting, but something softer than the anger that had crackled between them the night before. Understanding, maybe? Or the beginning of it. "They should be in school," he said quietly as they watched the girls debate the optimal pancake-to-syrup ratio with the intensity of UN negotiators. Amelia's smile faded slightly. "I know. I've been trying to save enough for enrollment fees and supplies, but—" She shrugged, the gesture carrying the weight of 1,000 compromises she had been forced to make. "Let me pay for it," he said quickly. "Let me give them what they need. Please." "Ethan." There was warning in her voice, the same protective edge that had been there the night before. "Not as charity," he said desperately. "As their father. As someone who owes them 7 years of birthdays and Christmas mornings and everything else. Let me do this one thing right." She studied his face, searching for something he hoped she would find. Finally, she nodded, a small movement that felt like a door opening just a crack. After breakfast, which was simultaneously the best and worst meal he had ever eaten, burned bacon and lumpy pancakes that tasted like love and possibility, the girls gravitated back to the piano. But this time, Ethan joined them. His fingers found the keys with the muscle memory of decades, and he began to play a simple melody, something soft and sweet that matched the morning light. One by one, his daughters added their voices, humming along to music they had never heard but somehow knew in their bones. Amelia leaned against the window, watching this scene unfold, and Ethan caught her wiping away a tear she thought no one would notice. But he noticed everything about her now, every expression, every gesture, every sign that the walls she had built might not be as impenetrable as they seemed. "Would you like to go out today?" he asked when the song ended, the words tumbling out before he could lose his nerve. "All of us, I mean, maybe to the park or wherever you think they'd like to go." Amelia didn't answer immediately, and he held his breath, waiting for rejection that would feel like another 7 years of missing out on everything that mattered. "Maybe," she said finally, and that single word contained more hope than he had allowed himself to feel in longer than he could remember. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of small miracles. The girls found paper and crayons in his office and spent an hour creating masterpieces that he would treasure more than any piece of art hanging on his walls. Grace drew a house with 4 stick figures standing in front of it, all holding hands. Lily's was more abstract, swirls of color that she explained were happy feelings. Emma drew a piano with a family gathered around it, and when she handed it to him, she said, "This is us, Daddy. This is our song." He taped their drawings to his refrigerator, these precious gifts that transformed his sterile kitchen into something that looked like a home where children lived and loved and left their mark on the world. As the day wound toward afternoon, a comfortable quiet settled over them all. The girls had claimed his living room as their own, building elaborate structures with couch cushions while Amelia sat nearby, watching them with the contentment of a mother whose children were safe and happy. Ethan watched too, memorizing every detail of this day that had started with burned bacon and grown into something he had never dared to dream possible. For the first time in 7 years, he felt like he might actually know what it meant to be a father. Not just someone who provided, but someone who belonged to the small, fierce hearts that had already made room for him in their world. The future stretched ahead of them, uncertain and fragile as morning light, but full of possibility. And for now, that was enough. The park stretched out before them like a canvas painted in shades of green and gold, dotted with the laughter of children who knew nothing of corporate empires or broken hearts or the weight of 7 lost years. Ethan stood at the edge of this world he had never belonged to, watching his daughters run toward the playground with the fearless joy that only children possessed, their voices carrying on the wind like birdsong. Emma made a beeline for the swings, her small legs pumping as she tried to build momentum, while Grace examined the slide with the scientific curiosity of an engineer planning her descent. Lily, ever the diplomat, attempted to organize a game that would include all the other children, her natural leadership shining through even at 6 years old. From a bench 20 feet away, Amelia watched this scene unfold with eyes that held both wonder and wariness. She had dressed carefully for this outing, choosing a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes and made her look less like a woman who sang on street corners and more like the successful businesswoman she had once been. But Ethan could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she held herself ready to intervene if this fragile experiment in family life went wrong. "Daddy, come push me." Emma's voice cut through his observation, and the casual use of that word still sent electricity through his chest. She was gesturing wildly from the swing, her face bright with expectation, and he realized she wasn't asking. She was commanding with all the authority of a daughter who had already decided he belonged to her. He approached the swing set with the careful steps of a man walking through a minefield, hyper-aware that every move was being watched and judged and filed away in the memory banks of children who would either remember this day as the beginning of something beautiful or the day their father proved he didn't know how to love them. His first push was too gentle, barely moving the swing at all. His second was too hard, sending Emma higher than she expected and making her squeal with a mixture of delight and surprise. But by the third push, he found the rhythm, the gentle consistency that made her laugh and call out, "Higher, Daddy, higher." Grace appeared at his elbow, tugging on his sleeve with the persistence of someone who had learned that quiet requests were often ignored. "Can you help me across the monkey bars? My hands aren't strong enough yet." And there it was again, that casual trust that pierced him like sunlight through stained glass. She wanted him to help not because she had to ask, but because she believed he could. Because to her, in this moment, he was simply Daddy, the person who was supposed to catch her when she fell. Meanwhile, Lily had successfully organized a game of tag that included half the children on the playground, her voice ringing out with instructions and encouragement as she made sure everyone felt included. She had Amelia's diplomatic heart, the ability to see what people needed and find ways to give to them. As the afternoon wore on, Ethan found himself settling onto the bench beside Amelia, both of them watching their daughters navigate this small world of slides and swings and childhood friendships with the ease of children who had learned to find joy wherever they could. "They're remarkable," he said quietly, not wanting to break the spell but needing to acknowledge what he was witnessing. Each one of them, completely different but remarkable. Amelia's smile was soft but guarded. They've had to be. Remarkable children survive things that would break remarkable adults. The words carried weight he was still learning to understand. These weren't children who had been sheltered and protected and given every advantage money could buy. These were children who had learned resilience in the hardest classroom of all, who had grown strong not because life was easy, but because it wasn't. "Tell me about when you were pregnant," he said, the words coming out more abrupt than he intended. "I need to know. I need to understand what you went through." Amelia was quiet for so long, he thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but distant, as if she were recounting someone else's story. "I found out about the pregnancy 3 weeks after you left for Tokyo," she said. "I kept thinking you'd call, that I'd have a chance to tell you. But days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, and your assistant kept saying you were in meetings or traveling or unavailable." The words hit him like physical blows. She had tried to tell him. She had tried to reach him, and he had been too busy building his empire to take her calls, too focused on his wounded pride to consider that she might need him. "I called 17 times," she continued, and he could hear the old pain bleeding through her carefully controlled voice. "I wrote letters. I even showed up at your old office, but they said you had relocated and couldn't give me any information about where you'd gone. God, Amelia, I'm so sorry." The words felt pathetic, inadequate against the magnitude of what his absence had cost. "I changed my number. I wanted a clean slate, I thought." "You thought you were free," she finished for him, and there was no accusation in her voice, just exhaustion. "And you were. I was the one who wasn't free. I was the one who had to figure out how to bring 3 babies into the world with no job, no support, no idea how I was going to survive. He wanted to reach for her to somehow absorb the pain he had caused, but he knew he had forfeited that right 7 years ago when he chose his wounded ego over the possibility that she might need him. I was scared every single day, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Scared I wouldn't be enough for them. Scared I'd fail them the way everyone else had failed me. But I couldn't give up because they needed me to be strong. Before he could respond, the sound of running feet interrupted them, and suddenly all 3 girls were there, breathless and flushed from play, each one carrying handfuls of dandelions they had picked from a grass near the playground. "These are for you, Mommy," Grace said solemnly, presenting her bouquet with the ceremony of someone offering crown jewels. "And these are for you, Daddy." Emma thrust her flowers at him with less ceremony but equal enthusiasm. "They're wishes," she explained. "You're supposed to blow on them and make a wish." Lily, ever practical, had chosen the fullest dandelions, the ones heavy with seeds that would scatter on the wind like tiny parachutes. "Make good wishes," she instructed seriously. "Important wishes." Ethan looked at the wilted flowers in his hands, these precious gifts from daughters who saw magic in weeds and possibilities in wishes, and felt his throat close with emotion he couldn't name. These children, who had every reason to be bitter and angry and closed off from the world, had chosen instead to give him flowers and faith and the chance to be their father. Amelia tried to hide her smile as she accepted her bouquet, but he caught it anyway, that flash of unguarded joy that transformed her face and made her look like the woman he had fallen in love with all those years ago. "Can we do this again tomorrow?" Emma asked, settling onto the bench between them with the casual intimacy of a child who had decided they all belonged together. "Can we come back and play again? And can we stay at Daddy's house again tonight?" Grace added hopefully, "Please." Lily, always the negotiator, sweetened the deal. "We could make dinner together. Real dinner, not just cereal." Ethan looked at Amelia, hope and fear warring in his chest. This fragile thing they were building could shatter so easily. One wrong word or misplaced expectation could send them all back to their separate corners of the world. But Amelia was looking at their daughters, at their eager faces and trusting hearts, and he saw the moment she made her choice. "One more night," she said finally, and the girls erupted in cheers that sent birds scattering from nearby trees. "But we need to talk about ground rules and expectations and what happens next." Ethan nodded, understanding that this wasn't just about one more night or one more day. This was about the future they might build together, brick by careful brick, wish by dandelion wish. As they walked home together through the golden afternoon light, their daughters running ahead and circling back like puppies, Ethan allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, some broken things could be mended. Some lost time could be reclaimed. Some families could find their way back to each other, even after 7 years of silence and a lifetime of regret. The kitchen had never felt so alive. Ethan moved between the stove and counter with careful precision, stirring the simple pasta sauce he'd been perfecting all afternoon. This wasn't about impressing anyone with his wealth or status. Tonight was different. Tonight was about something far more precious than money could ever buy. He had called Amelia that morning, his voice careful and hopeful. "Would you and the girls like to come over for dinner? Nothing fancy, just us." The pause that followed felt endless, but when she finally said yes, his heart had soared in a way he hadn't felt in 7 long years. The doorbell chimed at exactly 6 o'clock. Amelia stood there with Emma, Grace, and Lily, each girl dressed in their best clothes, which weren't much, but the effort was everything. Amelia wore a simple blue dress he remembered from their early days together, and his breath caught in his throat. "Welcome," he said softly, stepping aside to let them in. The house felt transformed with their presence, warm in ways his expensive heating system could never achieve. Emma bounced through the door first, her eyes wide with excitement. "It smells like heaven in here, Daddy." The word still made his chest tighten with overwhelming emotion. Grace followed more cautiously, her analytical gaze taking in every detail of the dining room he'd carefully prepared. The table was set simply, no crystal or silver, just clean white plates and cloth napkins. Lily entered last, immediately noticing the small vase of wildflowers he'd picked from his own garden. Amelia's eyes swept the room, and he watched her face soften with surprise. She'd been expecting ostentation, he realized. She'd been bracing herself for the old Ethan, the one who solved everything with money and grand gestures. Instead, she found candles, homemade bread, and a man who'd spent the entire day learning how to make spaghetti sauce from scratch. "Can we help?" Grace asked, tugging at his sleeve. Her curiosity was endearing, the way she wanted to understand how everything worked, even a simple dinner. "Of course you can." Ethan knelt down to her level. "Would you like to help me carry the salad bowls?" Soon all three girls were bustling around the dining room, their small hands carefully placing napkins and straightening forks. Lily took charge naturally, directing her sisters with gentle authority. "Emma, the glasses go on the right. Grace, make sure the napkins are folded nice." As they worked, Ethan found himself drawn into individual conversations with each daughter. Emma chatted about a butterfly she'd seen that morning, her words tumbling over each other in excitement. Grace asked thoughtful questions about how pasta was made, her mind always seeking to understand. Lily shared her dreams of having a garden where she could grow flowers for everyone she loved. Each conversation was a revelation. These weren't just his children, they were complete little people with hopes and fears and beautiful, complex inner worlds. He'd missed 6 years of bedtime stories, first steps, scraped knees, and laughter. The weight of that loss pressed against his chest, but beneath it was something stronger. Gratitude. Overwhelming gratitude that they were here now. Amelia watched from the kitchen doorway, her arms crossed, trying to maintain her emotional distance. But he could see her resolve wavering as Emma threw her arms around his neck, as Grace showed him a drawing she'd made, as Lily carefully adjusted the flowers in the vase to make them more perfect. During dinner, Ethan found himself sharing stories he hadn't thought about in years. "Your mother and I once got caught in a thunderstorm," he began, his eyes meeting Amelia's across the table. "We took shelter under a bridge, and she started singing to calm me down because I was terrified of lightning." The girls giggled, delighted by the image of their strong, composed mother comforting their father. Emma clapped her hands. "Mommy still sings when we're scared." Amelia's cheeks flushed pink. "That's different," she murmured, but there was a softness in her voice that hadn't been there before. "Tell them about the time you made me breakfast," Amelia said suddenly, surprising everyone, including herself. "And you burned the eggs so badly the smoke alarm went off in our tiny apartment." Now Ethan laughed, a genuine sound that filled the room. The neighbors thought there was a fire. "Your mother saved the day with peanut butter sandwiches." "Peanut butter sandwiches for breakfast?" Lily asked, scandalized but delighted. "Sometimes the best meals are the unexpected ones," Amelia said quietly, her eyes still on Ethan. As the evening wound down, Grace pulled out a small camera she'd found in one of the rooms. "Can we take a picture? All of us together?" Before anyone could object, she'd set the timer and run back to the table. The flash went off, capturing a moment none of them had planned. Ethan helping Emma wipe sauce from her chin. Lily leaning against Amelia's shoulder. Grace grinning proudly at her handiwork. And in the center, Amelia and Ethan, not touching, but closer than they'd been in years. Later, looking at the printed photo, Ethan felt his throat close with emotion. They looked like a family. Not perfect, not without complications, but real. Whole, in a way he'd forgotten was possible. "I want to set up an education fund," he said suddenly, turning to Amelia. "For the girls. For their future." Amelia's expression hardened slightly. "Ethan, I told you we don't need your charity." "It's not charity. It's responsibility. But..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I want you involved in every decision. This isn't about me swooping in to save the day. This is about us working together for them." Her surprise was evident. She'd expected him to try to take control, to solve everything with his checkbook. Instead, he was offering partnership. Before she could respond, Emma's sleepy voice cut through the adult conversation. "Are we going to be a family now? Like in the movies?" The question hung in the air like a prayer. Amelia froze, her eyes wide with panic and longing. Ethan watched her struggle, understanding completely. Hope was dangerous when you'd been hurt so deeply. Without thinking, he reached over and gently took her hand. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly. He didn't squeeze or pull, just offered his warmth, his presence, his silent promise that whatever happened, they would face it together. Their eyes met across the table, past their daughter's expectant faces, past 7 years of pain and separation, past all the ways they'd both changed and grown. The answer wasn't yes, and it wasn't no. It was maybe. It was we'll see. It was let's take this one day at a time and see if we can heal what was broken. Sometimes maybe was enough to build a future on. The photograph appeared on page 3 of the local newspaper on a Tuesday morning. Ethan stared at it over his coffee, his blood turning cold. There they were, all 5 of them, captured outside the small cafe where they'd gone for ice cream just 2 days ago. The headline read, "Millionaire CEO's Secret Family, from street singer to fairy tale." The reporter had done his homework. The article detailed Amelia's struggles, her performances on street corners, the years she'd spent raising triplets alone while their wealthy father remained oblivious to their existence. It painted Ethan as both villain and hero, the man who'd abandoned his pregnant girlfriend only to sweep back into their lives like a knight in shining armor. His phone began ringing before he'd finished reading. Board members, investors, business partners, all wanting to know about his situation, as they so delicately put it. Each conversation left him feeling more exposed, more defensive. These were his daughters, his family, not some corporate crisis to be managed. Across town, Amelia clutched the same newspaper with trembling hands. Mrs. Chun from the corner market had thrust it at her with excited chatter about how wonderful it was that her troubles were over. Wonderful. As if her entire life, her struggles, her strength could be reduced to a feel-good story about a rich man's redemption. Emma tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, why is our picture in the paper? Are we famous now?" Grace peered over her shoulder, reading with that analytical mind of hers. Even at 6, she understood more than she should. "It says Daddy is very rich. Does that mean we're rich too?" Lily, ever the organizer, was already thinking ahead. Will people at school know about us now? Will they treat us different? The questions pierced Amelia's heart. These were the fears she'd carried for years, the reason she'd been so hesitant to let Ethan back into their lives. She'd wanted her daughters to be valued for who they were, not as accessories to someone else's wealth or redemption story. At his office, Ethan fielded another call from a board member expressing concern about image management. He hung up mid-sentence, his patience finally snapping. These people talk about his family like they were stock options or marketing opportunities. The rage that built in his chest was clean and fierce. He tried calling Amelia, but her phone went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Nothing. By the 3rd attempt, he was grabbing his keys, leaving a trail of confused assistants and canceled meetings in his wake. He found them at the small playground near their old apartment, the girls sitting quietly on the swings while Amelia paced nearby like a caged animal. She looked up as he approached, her eyes blazing with an emotion he couldn't quite name. Fury, yes, but something deeper. Betrayal. "They made us sound like a charity case," she said before he could speak. "Like I was some pathetic woman waiting to be rescued. Amelia, I had nothing to do with this. I would never. I know that." Her voice cracked slightly. "But it doesn't matter, does it? Now we're public property. Now our business is entertainment for people who don't even know us." Emma had stopped swinging and was watching them with worried eyes. "Are we in trouble? Did we do something wrong?" The innocence in that question broke something inside both adults. Ethan knelt down in front of all 3 girls, his voice gentle but serious. "You didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, and sometimes other grown-ups write about things that aren't their business to write about. But people will know about us now, Grace said quietly. At school, everywhere we go. Will you still be our daddy if people are mean to us? Lily asked, her small hand reaching for his. The question hit him like a physical blow. His throat tightened as he realized what they were really asking. Would he disappear again when things got difficult? Would he abandon them the moment being their father became inconvenient? Nothing and no one will ever make me stop being your father, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Nothing. That evening, after the girls were asleep, Ethan and Amelia sat across from each other in his living room. The conversation they'd been avoiding could no longer be postponed. We need professional help, Ethan said finally. All of us. This is bigger than we can handle alone. Amelia's first instinct was to resist. She'd been handling things alone for 6 years. But then she thought about the fear in her daughter's eyes, the way they'd huddled together at the playground like they were bracing for impact. The girls are scared they'll be taken away from me, she admitted quietly. They've heard stories about rich people who fight for custody, who use their money to take children from their mothers. I would never do that. I know, but they don't understand that yet. They just know that their world has changed overnight, and change has never been good news in their experience. Ethan leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together. Dr. Sarah Mitchell. She specializes in family therapy, especially with children who've experienced trauma or major life transitions. I can call her tomorrow. Amelia was quiet for a long moment. Will you be there? In the sessions, I mean, if you want me there. If the girls want me there. They do want you there. That's what terrifies me. She looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. They're already attached to you, Ethan. If this doesn't work out, if you decide this is too complicated or too public or too messy for your life, it won't just be my heart that breaks this time. The weight of that responsibility settled over him like a mantle. 3 little girls who called him daddy. A woman who'd learned not to trust promises. A family that was fragile and precious and completely dependent on his ability to be better than he'd ever been before. Outside, a photographer with a long lens probably lurked in the shadows, hoping for another candid shot to sell to the highest bidder. Inside, 3 children slept peacefully, trusting that the adults in their lives would figure out how to protect them from a world that saw them as a story rather than as people. Ethan looked at Amelia, really looked at her, seeing not the girl he'd once known, but the woman she'd become. Strong, fierce, unbreakable. She'd raised his daughters to be kind and curious and brave, had given them everything that mattered most despite having so little of what the world said was important. I'm going to change, he said quietly. Not just my schedule or my priorities. Me, the kind of man I am, the kind of father I want to be. For the first time since the newspaper article had appeared, Amelia's expression softened. That's what they need from you, Ethan. Not your money or your influence. Just you. The real you. The man I fell in love with before you forgot who that was. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. More photographers, more questions, more people who wanted to turn their fragile family into public spectacle. But tonight, in the quiet of his living room, with his daughters sleeping safely upstairs, Ethan made a promise to himself and to them. He would learn how to be the man they needed him to be. The school enrollment forms lay spread across Ethan's dining table like a battlefield of bureaucracy. Private school brochures with glossy photographs of pristine uniforms and manicured lawns sat beside public school applications and scholarship forms. Each choice carried weight, each decision another step into uncharted territory. Ethan looked up as Amelia studied the papers, her finger tracing the tuition costs with a frown that deepened with each zero. We don't have to decide today, he said carefully. We can take our time, visit the schools, see what feels right. For who? The question came out sharper than she'd intended. What feels right for them, or what feels right for your reputation? The accusation hung in the air between them. Ethan felt his jaw tighten, that familiar defensive wall starting to rise. But then he saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her shoulders carried the weight of years spent making every decision alone, and his anger dissolved into something softer. "For them," he said quietly. "Only for them." Emma burst through the front door at that moment, Grace and Lily close behind, their backpacks bouncing as they ran. They'd spent 3 days at their father's house now, the longest stretch since their reunion, and the comfort they showed in this space made Amelia's chest tighten with an emotion she didn't want to name. "Daddy, can we show you our fort?" Emma grabbed Ethan's hand, tugging him toward the living room, where they'd constructed an elaborate castle from couch cushions and blankets. Amelia watched as he allowed himself to be led away, his face lighting up with genuine delight as Grace explained the structural engineering of their creation and Lily demonstrated the proper way to enter without disturbing the walls. The ease between them was beautiful and painful all at once. This was what she'd always dreamed their daughters would have. A father who listened, who engaged, who made them feel like their ideas mattered. But seeing it now, in this house filled with expensive furniture and original artwork, she felt like an outsider looking in on someone else's family. "Mommy, come see." Lily called from inside the fort, her voice muffled by pillows. But Amelia was already gathering her purse, her movements sharp with suppressed emotion. "I need to go check on some things. I'll pick you girls up tomorrow morning." The sudden shift in atmosphere was immediate. Emma poked her head out of the fort, confusion written across her small features. Grace emerged more slowly, that analytical mind already working to understand what had gone wrong. Lily appeared last, her natural diplomatic instincts on high alert. "Are you mad at us, Mommy?" Emma's voice was small, uncertain. "No, baby. Mommy just has some errands to run." But her voice was tight, controlled in the way that always made the girls nervous. Ethan followed her to the door, his own frustration building. "Amelia, what's wrong? 5 minutes ago, we were fine." "Were we?" She turned to face him, eyes blazing. "Because I'm starting to feel like the hired help who gets dismissed when the real parent takes over. That's not what's happening here. Isn't it? They have a fort made of designer cushions, Ethan. They have rooms here with more toys than they've owned in their entire lives. They have a father who can give them everything I never could. I don't want to replace you. I want to support you. With money. Always with money. Private schools and trust funds and security details. Your solution to everything is to throw cash at it until it goes away." Ethan felt his own temper flare. "And your solution is to push away anyone who tries to help. You've been doing this alone for so long you don't remember how to let anyone share the load. Because the last time I trusted you to share the load, you disappeared." The words hit him like a physical blow. Behind them, 3 little girls had gone completely silent, their fort forgotten as they listened to the first real fight their parents had ever had in their presence. The silence stretched between them, heavy with years of hurt and misunderstanding. Then Emma's voice, barely above a whisper, "Are you getting divorced again?" Neither adult had heard her approach. She stood in the hallway, tears streaming down her face, with Grace and Lily flanking her like protective bodyguards. In Lily's hand was a piece of paper, folded small and damp with worried fingerprints. "We wrote you something," Lily said, holding out the note with trembling fingers. Ethan took it with gentle hands, unfolding it to reveal 3 different handwritings, each in a different colored crayon. Emma's impulsive scrawl, "Don't fight, please." Grace's careful block letters, "We love you both." And Lily's diplomatic addition, "Can we talk about feelings instead?" The simple wisdom of children broke through their adult defenses like sunlight through storm clouds. Amelia sank to her knees, pulling all 3 girls into her arms, her own tears mixing with theirs. "I'm sorry, babies. We're not getting divorced because we were never married again. We're just learning how to be a family." "Learning is hard," Grace said solemnly. "That's why teachers give you second chances when you make mistakes." Ethan knelt beside them, his voice rough with emotion. "Your mom and I both made mistakes just now. We forgot that the most important thing isn't being right, it's being kind to each other. Especially when we're scared. Amelia added, looking at him over their daughters' heads. Sometimes grown-ups get scared too. That evening, after the girls had fallen asleep in their shared bedroom at Ethan's house, he and Amelia sat in his kitchen nursing cups of tea that had long since gone cold. The fight had stripped away their careful politeness, leaving them raw and honest in a way they hadn't been since they were young and foolish, and thought love was enough to conquer anything. "I'm terrified," Amelia said suddenly, "of trusting you, of letting them love you too much, of falling for you again and watching you walk away when things get complicated." "I'm terrified too," Ethan admitted, "of not being enough, of failing them the way I failed you, of being the kind of father who provides everything except what they actually need." "What do they need?" "You," he said without hesitation. "They need their mother. They need your strength and your music and your ability to make magic out of nothing. I can give them security, but you gave them souls." Dr. Mitchell's office felt like neutral ground when they walked in the following week, all 5 of them together for the first time in a professional setting. The therapist was warm and unintimidating, with kind eyes and a voice that made even Emma feel safe enough to share her feelings. "Families come in all shapes," Dr. Mitchell explained to the girls. "Sometimes they're made quickly, and sometimes they're made slowly, one conversation at a time." "How long does it take?" Grace asked, ever practical. "As long as it takes," the therapist replied. "There's no rush. The most important thing is that everyone feels heard and safe." Over the following sessions, truths emerged like flowers after rain. The girls admitted their fear of being separated. Ethan acknowledged his tendency to solve problems with money because emotions felt too dangerous. Amelia confessed that accepting help felt like admitting she'd failed as a mother. "I spent 6 years proving I could do it alone," she said during one session, her voice barely above a whisper. "If I let you help now, what was all that struggle for?" "It was for them," Ethan said, gesturing to their daughters, who were coloring quietly in the corner. "Every sacrifice you made, every song you sang on street corners, every night you went hungry so they could eat. It was all for them. And now, letting me help, that's for them too." In the safety of that small office, with a professional guide and 3 little girls who loved them both, Ethan and Amelia began to dismantle the walls they'd built around their hearts. Not to fall in love again, not yet, but to learn if the people they'd become could build something better than what they'd lost. For the first time in 7 years, they looked at each other without armor, without pretense, without the protective shields they'd worn for so long. They saw fear and hope and the possibility of forgiveness. They saw 2 people who'd been broken by life and love, who'd learned to survive alone, now trying to figure out if they could heal together. It was a beginning. Fragile, uncertain, but real. The words echoed through the elementary school hallway like a prayer finally answered. "This is my daddy, Ethan," Emma announced proudly to her teacher, her small hand clasped firmly in his much larger one. Grace nodded seriously beside them, adding, "He's learning how to be a really good daddy." Lily, ever the diplomat, smiled up at the teacher and explained, "He's been practicing a lot." Amelia stood frozen near the classroom door, watching this moment she dreamed of for 6 years unfold in front of her. The casual way they claimed him, the pride in their voices, the absolute certainty that he belonged to them now, completely and irrevocably. Her heart swelled and broke simultaneously, joy and grief tangling together in her chest like thorns and roses. Outside in the parking lot, Ethan sat in his car for 20 minutes after the girls had gone into their classrooms. His hands shook as he gripped the steering wheel, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. They'd called him Daddy, not just in private moments or in the safety of his home, but in public, to strangers, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He thought about all the father-daughter moments he'd missed. First steps, first words, first days of school, Christmas mornings and birthday parties and bedtime stories. But somehow, impossibly, they'd saved room for him in their hearts anyway. The tears came then, hot and grateful for second chances he didn't deserve but would spend his life earning. The next few weeks brought a parade of small, precious firsts. Ethan at the school science fair, watching Grace explain her volcano project with the intensity of a seasoned researcher. Ethan at the school play, beaming as Emma delivered her one line as a talking flower with theatrical flair. Ethan at the parent-teacher conference, sitting beside Amelia as they listened to glowing reports about Lily's natural leadership abilities. Amelia watched it all from her careful distance, still protecting her heart, but unable to deny the transformation she witnessed. This wasn't the Ethan she'd known 7 years ago, the one who'd been too busy building his empire to notice her growing belly. This man arrived early to every event, asked thoughtful questions, remembered every detail their daughters shared with him. The music recital was Emma's idea, born from her discovery of the piano in Ethan's living room and her mother's endless repertoire of songs. "We should do a concert," she'd announced one evening. Like a real family concert where everyone has a part. They practiced for weeks. Ethan's fingers, once confident on boardroom presentations, trembled as he relearned melodies he hadn't played since college. The girls harmonized with voices sweet and pure, while Amelia coached from the sidelines, her own voice joining theirs during the more difficult passages. The night of their impromptu recital, Ethan's living room had been transformed into a concert hall. 3 dining room chairs served as the audience seating, with stuffed animals filling in as additional spectators. Emma wore her best dress. Grace had braided flowers into her hair, and Lily had appointed herself as the evening's master of ceremonies. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lily announced with impressive poise, "welcome to the Mitchell-Reed Family Music Show." The hyphenated name rolled off her tongue naturally, as if she'd been practicing it in private. Ethan's hands found the piano keys, and the first notes of Edelweiss filled the room. The girls' voices joined his playing, clear and confident, while Amelia stood behind her phone camera, trying to capture every moment while tears blurred her vision. Through the small screen, she watched her family perform together, and for the first time in years, the word family didn't come with a qualifier or an explanation. After the girls had gone to bed, drunk on applause and hot chocolate, Ethan and Amelia found themselves alone in the kitchen, the weight of unspoken words heavy between them. "They're happy," Amelia said finally, her voice soft with wonder. "Really, genuinely happy in a way I haven't seen since they were babies." "Are you happy?" The question escaped before he could stop it, vulnerable and hopeful. She was quiet for a long moment, considering. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "But yes, happier than I've been in years." Ethan turned to face her fully, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Do you think we could try? Not rushing, not assuming anything, just seeing if we could be a family again?" The question hung in the air like a held breath. Amelia looked toward the stairs where their daughters slept, peaceful and secure in a way that had everything to do with this man who'd stumbled back into their lives. "I don't know if we can be what we were," she said carefully. "But they already think we're family. They've decided it for us, in that way children do when they see something they need and claim it as their own. Would you have dinner with me? Just us. No little chaperones, no therapy sessions, no school events. Just us figuring out what we might be to each other now." The invitation was simple, but they both knew it carried the weight of possibility. A real conversation, a real chance, maybe even a real beginning. "Okay," she said, the word barely above a whisper. "But slowly, Ethan. I need us to go slowly. As slow as you need." The next morning brought a new complication in the form of Emma's direct questioning. "When are you and Daddy getting married?" she asked over breakfast, her spoon paused halfway to her mouth. Amelia nearly choked on her coffee. "Emma, sweetie, we're not. That's not." "But you love each other," Grace stated matter-of-factly. "We can tell. You look at each other the way people do in movies before they kiss. And you both get all smiley and weird when we talk about being a family," Lily added with the diplomatic observation skills that made her seem far older than 6. Ethan rescued Amelia from her stammering. "Your mom and I are learning how to be friends again first. Sometimes grown-ups need to take things very slowly to make sure they get them right." "How slowly?" Emma pressed. "Like slower than Christmas coming?" "Maybe that's slowly, Amelia managed, shooting Ethan a grateful look. That afternoon, while Ethan was at work, the girls presented Amelia with their latest artistic creation. It was a family portrait drawn on a piece of construction paper in bright crayons. 5 stick figures holding hands in front of a house with a tree and a sun that wore a smiley face. "That's you, that's Daddy Ethan, and that's us," Emma explained, pointing to each figure. "We're all holding hands because families hold hands." Amelia studied the drawing, her throat tight with emotion. In the children's version of their family, there were no complications, no past hurt, no fear of the future. Just 5 people who belonged together, standing under a smiling sun in front of a home that looked suspiciously like Ethan's house. She folded the drawing carefully and slipped it into her purse, right next to her wallet where she'd see it every day. A secret talisman, a reminder that sometimes the simplest truths came from the purest hearts. Maybe her daughters were right. Maybe they were already a family, even if the adults were still catching up to what the children had known all along. Maybe love didn't always arrive with fanfare and certainty. Maybe sometimes it came quietly, one piano lesson at a time, one school event at a time, one carefully folded drawing at a time. Maybe it was already here, patient and persistent as only a child's love could be, waiting for the grown-ups to stop being afraid and just reach out their hands. The wicker basket sat heavy in Ethan's hands as he spread the red checker blanket across the grass in Riverside Park. He'd chosen this spot carefully, under the old oak tree where shafts of golden sunlight filtered through leaves that whispered secrets to the wind. This wasn't just any picnic. This was the day he'd been planning for weeks, the day he hoped might change everything. Amelia arrived with the girls promptly at noon, their excited chatter filling the air like bird song. But when Emma spotted the cluster of white daisies nestled beside the picnic basket, she gasped with delight. "Mommy, look, those are your favorite flowers." Amelia stopped walking, her breath catching in her throat. They were daisies, simple and unpretentious, the same flowers she'd picked as a child and woven into chains for her hair. The same flowers Ethan had brought her on their very first date when they were young and poor and thought love could survive on dreams alone. He'd remembered. After all these years, through all the pain and separation, he'd remembered. "How did you?" She began, but her voice trailed off as understanding dawned in her eyes. "I remember everything about you," Ethan said quietly. "Every little thing." The girls scattered across the park like dandelion seeds on the breeze, their laughter echoing as they chased butterflies and climbed on the old playground equipment. Emma hung upside down from the monkey bars, her hair brushing the sand below. Grace sat cross-legged examining a collection of interesting rocks she'd gathered. Lily organized impromptu game of tag with children from other families, her natural leadership skills drawing others into her orbit. Ethan watched them with wonder, these beautiful beings who carried his DNA and Amelia's spirit, who had somehow thrived despite his absence. "Come sit with me," he said, patting the blanket beside him. For the first time in months, Amelia didn't hesitate. She settled next to him, close enough that he could smell her shampoo, the same lavender scent she'd used when they were together before. Close enough that their shoulders almost touched, separated only by years of hurt and a whisper of possibility. "Do you remember our first picnic?" Ethan asked, unpacking sandwiches he'd made himself, imperfect but crafted with love. Amelia smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Peanut butter and jelly on white bread, because it was all we could afford. You brought a radio that barely worked, and we danced to static and fragments of songs. You said the static was just the universe humming along with us. I was so young, so ridiculously optimistic." Her voice carried wistfulness, but not bitterness. "You still are," Ethan said, turning to look at her fully. "Optimistic. It's how you raised 3 incredible daughters on your own, how you never gave up hope even when I did." The weight of unspoken words hung between them like morning mist. Amelia picked at the grass beside the blanket, her fingers nervous with the magnitude of what she was about to say. "I never stopped loving you," she whispered, the words barely audible above the children's distant laughter. "I hated you for leaving. I was furious at you for disappearing, but I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day." Ethan's throat closed with emotion. "I thought about you every morning when I woke up and every night before I fell asleep. I built my entire empire thinking maybe someday I'd be worthy of finding you again." "You were always worthy, Ethan. You just forgot how to believe it." Before either could say more, 3 small bodies launched themselves at the blanket in a tangle of arms and legs and grass-stained clothes. Emma threw herself across both their laps, Grace curled up beside Amelia, and Lily settled between them like a bridge connecting 2 shores. "Group hug," Emma declared, wrapping her arms around both adults and squeezing with all her 6-year-old might. In that moment, with their daughter's arms encircling them both, something shifted. Something final and beautiful clicked into place. They weren't just 2 people sharing custody of children anymore. They were a unit, a constellation of 5 hearts beating in synchrony. Across the park, a teenage boy with his phone captured the moment without thinking. The image of the reunited family, bathed in golden afternoon light, their faces glowing with happiness and hope, would be shared thousands of times before sunset. But in that instant, none of them were thinking about the outside world or its opinions. They were simply present, simply whole. Later, when the inevitable calls came about the viral photograph, Ethan and Amelia faced them together. "We'll need to release a statement," Ethan said, already reaching for his phone to call his publicist. "What should it say?" Amelia asked, surprising him by not protesting the media attention this time. "The truth, that we're a family finding our way back to each other." "I can live with that," she said, and he heard the change in her voice. The partnership, the trust. As the afternoon wore on, they talked about practicalities with an ease that would have been impossible months before. The girls would split time between both homes until they figured out something more permanent. They'd coordinate schedules, share school duties, present a united front in all things concerning their daughters. "There's something else," Ethan said as they began packing up the picnic supplies. "The paternity paperwork. I'd like to make it official. Legal. I want my name on their birth certificates. I want the world to know they're mine." The request hung in the air like a prayer waiting to be answered. This wasn't about money or inheritance or legal rights. This was about belonging, about claiming them as openly and completely as they'd claimed him. Amelia was quiet for a long moment, watching their daughters chase fireflies that had begun to emerge in the gathering dusk. Emma leaped after the tiny lights with wild abandon. Grace studied their flight patterns with scientific fascination. Lily tried to explain to a younger child how to cup your hands to catch them gently. "Yes," she said finally, the words simple and clean and perfect. "Yes, they should have your name. They should have you, officially and completely." The girls erupted in celebration when they overheard, jumping and spinning, and declaring this the best day ever. Ethan felt a weight lift from his chest that he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it was there. The weight of not being enough, not belonging, not deserving this second chance at fatherhood. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Amelia found herself leaning against Ethan's shoulder for the first time in 7 years. His arm came around her naturally, protectively, like coming home after a long journey through foreign lands. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice soft with exhaustion and hope. "Now, we take it one day at a time," he replied, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of her head. "We figure out how to be a family, all of us together." For the first time since their reunion, all 5 of them fell asleep that night dreaming of the same future. A future where love was strong enough to heal old wounds, where second chances bloomed like flowers in spring, where a family broken by time and circumstance could be made whole again by the simple, persistent power of never giving up on each other. The first yes had been spoken, and sometimes one yes is all it takes to change everything. The marble floors of the courthouse echoed with their footsteps as Ethan and Amelia walked toward the clerk's office, 3 small hands clutched tightly in theirs. The paternity petition felt heavy in Ethan's briefcase, not because of its weight, but because of its meaning. Today, he would officially become what he'd already been in his heart for months now. Their father. Not just biologically, but legally, irrevocably, completely. Emma skipped beside him, her excitement bubbling over like champagne. "Are we going to be real now, Daddy? Like really, really real?" The question pierced through all his carefully constructed composure. Ethan stopped walking and knelt down, so he was eye level with all three girls. Grace watched him with her thoughtful gaze. Lily tilted her head with diplomatic curiosity, and Emma bounced on her toes with barely contained energy. "You were always real," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "From the moment you were born, from the moment I saw you on that street corner, from the moment you called me Daddy for the first time. This is just paperwork catching up with what's already true." Amelia felt tears prick her eyes as she watched him with their daughters. This moment had been 7 years in the making, built on a foundation of mistakes and forgiveness, of second chances, and the inexplicable resilience of love. The actual filing took less than an hour, but the weight of it would last forever. As they left the courthouse, cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters shouted questions that blurred together into white noise. Ethan instinctively moved to shield his family, his body creating a protective barrier between them and the chaos of public interest. That evening, the story dominated local news. Millionaire CEO officially claims triplet daughters ran across the bottom of television screens in homes across the city. The narrative was neat and digestible, a redemption story that satisfied the public's hunger for happy endings. But Ethan knew the real story was messier, more complex, more beautiful than any soundbite could capture. The real story was in the way Emma had grabbed his hand in the courthouse and refused to let go. It was in Grace's careful questions about what the paperwork meant for their daily lives. It was in Lily's diplomatic explanation to her sisters that now they had the same last name as their daddy. "I need to give a press conference," Ethan told Amelia that night, after the girls had finally fallen asleep, exhausted from the day's excitement. "If we don't control the narrative, they'll create their own. And I won't let them turn our family into entertainment." Amelia's first instinct was to protest, to hide, to protect their privacy at all costs. But she'd learned to trust Ethan's judgment about navigating the public eye. "What will you say?" "The truth. That they're my daughters, that they're my priority, and that our family's privacy should be respected." The press conference was brief and dignified. Ethan stood behind a podium, his voice steady and clear as he addressed the assembled reporters. "My daughters are not a story," he said, looking directly into the cameras. "They're children who deserve to grow up without being scrutinized by strangers. I'm asking for your respect and your distance as we build our life together." Amelia watched from her living room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, as the man she was learning to love again claimed his place as protector of their small family. The girls sat beside her on the couch, wide-eyed at seeing their father on television. "Daddy looks important," Emma whispered. "He is important," Grace replied with her characteristic seriousness. "He's our daddy." Within days, photos of the girls appeared on social media platforms, shared by well-meaning strangers who thought their story was heartwarming. Ethan and Amelia found themselves having difficult conversations about internet safety and public exposure that most parents never had to navigate. "No more tablets or phones unless we're here," Amelia announced, feeling guilty but resolute. "And no more pictures posted online without our permission." The girls complained, as children do when their world suddenly has new rules. But Lily, with her natural understanding of social dynamics, explained it to her sisters. "Some people want to know about our business when it's not their business to know." A week later, Amelia arrived home from grocery shopping to find a delivery truck parked outside her small apartment building. 2 men were carefully maneuvering a baby grand piano through her front door, supervised by Ethan, who stood nervously in her living room. "I know I should have asked," he said before she could speak. "But I remembered how you used to play for me, and I thought maybe you'd want to play for them. Teach them properly. Make music together." The piano was beautiful, its ebony surface gleaming like still water. But more than that, it represented understanding. Not just of her love for music, but of her need to maintain her identity as their mother, their first teacher, their anchor. "It's perfect," she said, running her fingers along the keys. The sound that emerged was pure and sweet, filling her small space with possibility. That night, they declared their first official family night. The girls had planned it like a military operation, with Emma in charge of snacks, Grace responsible for games, and Lily coordinating the schedule. They made popcorn that burned slightly because they were all talking too much to pay attention to the stove. They played charades until their sides hurt from laughing. They sang songs around the new piano until the neighbors surely wanted to complain, but were too charmed to actually do it. Ethan found himself sitting on Amelia's small couch, Emma curled against his left side, Grace leaning on his right, while Lily claimed his lap as her throne. This was what he'd been searching for in all those empty rooms of his mansion. Not space or luxury or status symbols, but this feeling of belonging so completely to people who chose to love him. Amelia watched from the piano bench, her heart full in ways she'd forgotten were possible. This wasn't the life she'd planned when she was pregnant and alone and scared. But it was the life they'd built together, piece by careful piece, and it was more beautiful than anything she could have imagined. Later, after the girls were asleep in their shared bedroom, Ethan and Amelia sat at her small kitchen table, school brochures spread between them like maps to possible futures. "St. Mary's has an excellent music program," Ethan said, pointing to glossy photographs of children with violins and cellos. "But Riverside Elementary is where their friends are," Amelia countered, "where they feel normal and accepted." They talked through options like the team they were becoming. Private versus public. Arts-focused versus well-rounded. Near his house versus near hers. Each decision made together, each choice weighed with their daughter's happiness as the primary concern. "We're getting good at this," Amelia said as they finally cleared the table. "At what?" "Being parents. Together. Making decisions that aren't just about what we want, but about what they need." Ethan gathered the scattered papers, but his eyes never left her face. "I want us to be good at it. I want to be the father they deserve and the partner you deserve." "You already are," she said simply. "You became that the moment you decided to stay." Outside, the city continued its restless dance of lights and noise and endless motion. But inside Amelia's small apartment, 5 hearts beat in rhythm with a peace that felt permanent, a love that felt strong enough to weather any storm the world might bring their way. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, thick and formal, bearing the letterhead of Ethan's most prestigious client. Inside, an opportunity that would have once sent his heart racing with ambition. A 6-month contract in Singapore, leading a major expansion project. The kind of work that built empires and filled bank accounts. Ethan stared at the papers spread across his kitchen table, coffee growing cold in his hands. 6 months. Half a year away from Emma's spontaneous hugs, Grace's thoughtful questions, and Lily's gentle wisdom. Half a year away from watching Amelia's fingers dance across piano keys in the evening light. When had his priorities shifted so completely? The conversation with Amelia came that evening after the girls had gone to bed. She found him on the back patio, the contract still weighing heavy in his thoughts. Her presence was soft, familiar now in ways that both comforted and unsettled him. "You're quiet tonight," she observed, settling into the chair beside him. The scent of her lavender shampoo mingled with the cool autumn air. He handed her the papers without preamble, watched her dark eyes scan the details, her expression unreadable in the moonlight. When she looked up, there was something fierce and tender in her gaze that caught him off guard. "This is incredible, Ethan. This is exactly the kind of project you used to dream about." "Used to." The words felt heavy. That was before. Before what? Before you became a father? Her voice carried a gentle challenge. Being a good father doesn't mean abandoning who you are. The girls need to see you pursuing your dreams, not sacrificing everything for them. How could she be so generous? How could she encourage him to leave when he'd spent months proving he would stay? The next morning brought the inevitable conversation with the girls. Emma's face crumpled immediately. "But Daddy, you just got here." Grace studied his face with those serious eyes, as if trying to solve a complex equation. Lily, ever the diplomat, asked quietly, "How long is 6 months in kid time?" "Too long," Emma declared, crossing her arms with the dramatic flair of a 7-year-old. "What if we came with you?" The suggestion tumbled out before Ethan could stop it. "Singapore has excellent schools. We could make an adventure." But even as he spoke, he could see Amelia's hesitation. The girls had friends here, routines, stability. Emma was finally comfortable at school. Grace had found her place in the chess club. Lily was teaching piano to younger children at the community center. How could he ask them to uproot everything for his career? The decision, when it came, felt both right and devastating. He would go, they would stay, and somehow they would make it work. The first weeks were harder than anyone expected. Video calls became sacred rituals. Every evening at 7, no matter the time difference, Ethan's face would appear on the laptop screen. Emma would press kisses to the camera. Grace would show him her latest drawings. Lily would play new songs on the piano, the tinny laptop speakers doing little justice to her growing talent. But it was during the quiet moments, after the girls had said their goodnights, that Amelia would linger by the screen. These conversations were different, deeper. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing the small details of their days like they once had years ago, when the world was simpler and their hearts less scarred. "I miss you," she admitted one night, the words slipping out like a confession. The vulnerability in her voice made his chest tight with longing. "I miss you too," he replied, wishing he could reach through the screen and touch her face. "All of you, more than I ever imagined possible." The girls, resilient as children, are adapted in their own ways. Emma wrote him daily letters filled with crayon drawings and misspelled declarations of love. Grace created elaborate charts tracking the days until his return, complete with weather reports and family news. Lily organized the others, ensuring they had stories ready for their nightly calls. Ethan sent packages, not expensive gifts but thoughtful ones. A Singapore children's book for Emma, art supplies from local markets for Grace, sheet music from a street musician for Lily. Each item chosen with care, carrying pieces of his temporary world back to them. 3 weeks before his scheduled return, everything changed. A family emergency forced the early conclusion of his contract. As disappointment warred with relief in his chest, Ethan realized something profound. He wasn't devastated about leaving the project unfinished. He was elated about going home. Home. What had Singapore stopped feeling like an adventure and started feeling like exile. The airport arrival was chaos in the most beautiful way. Emma launched herself into his arms with the force of a small hurricane. Grace hung back for exactly 3 seconds before joining the embrace. Lily, trying to maintain dignity, lasted 5 seconds before adding herself to the pile. But it was Amelia who undid him completely. Standing just apart from a reunion, tears streaming down her cheeks, she looked at him like he was something precious she'd thought lost forever. "Welcome home," she whispered when the girls finally released him. And then, while Emma chattered about their surprise and Grace tugged at his jacket and Lily organized their exit from the airport, Amelia slipped her hand into his. Her fingers were warm, familiar, and when she didn't pull away, Ethan felt something shift between them. Not rushed, not desperate, but intentional. Later that evening, after the girls had performed their surprise song, a sweet, slightly off-key rendition of "You've Got a Friend," and after the stories had been told and the tears had been dried, Ethan found himself alone with Amelia in the kitchen. "You look different," she said, studying his face in the soft lamplight. "How so?" "Settled, like you finally know where you belong." He moved closer, drawn by something deeper than attraction, deeper than history. "I do know. I've always known. I just needed to remember that home isn't a place you visit. It's where you choose to build your life." When she stepped into his embrace, it felt like breathing after holding his breath for months. Natural, necessary, inevitable. We don't have to rush anything, he murmured against her hair. No, she agreed, but her arms tightened around him. We don't. But we don't have to pretend anymore either. Outside, autumn wind rustled through the trees, and upstairs, 3 little girls slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that their father was home. And in the kitchen, 2 hearts began the delicate work of remembering how to beat in rhythm again. The conversation began over morning coffee, sunlight streaming through Amelia's kitchen windows, casting golden patterns on the worn wooden table where they sat. Ethan had been staying in the guest room for 3 weeks since his return from Singapore, and the arrangement, while comfortable, felt temporary in a way that left them all unsettled. I want us to have a home together, he said quietly, his fingers wrapped around the ceramic mug she'd made in a pottery class years ago. A realoma. Not mine, not yours. Ours. Amelia's spoon clinked against her cup as she stirred honey into her tea, the sound sharp in the sudden stillness. Her dark eyes searched his face, looking for something she couldn't quite name. Trust, perhaps, or the absence of control. I need my independence, Ethan. The words came out softer than she'd intended, but firm nonetheless. I can't go back to being someone who disappears into your life, your choices, your world. He leaned forward, and she caught the scent of his familiar cologne mixed with coffee. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking if we can build something new. Together, equal partners in every decision, every choice. The conversation stretched across days, woven through bedtime stories and grocery trips and quiet moments after the girls had fallen asleep. They talked about mortgage payments and school districts, about space for Amelia's piano students, and room for the girls to grow. But underneath the practical discussions ran deeper currents of fear and hope, of old wounds that still ached and new dreams that felt almost too fragile to voice. It was Emma who broke through their careful deliberations with the devastating honesty of childhood. "Why don't we just draw what we want?" she announced one afternoon, spreading crayons across the coffee table. "Then we'll know what to look for." Grace immediately began sketching architectural layouts with the precision of a 7-year-old engineer. Lily drew musical notes floating from windows because houses should always have music coming out of them. And Emma? Emma drew stick figures holding hands in front of a house shaped like a heart. "That's us," she explained solemnly, pointing to each figure. "And that's our house where we're happy." Amelia found herself crying over that drawing later, standing alone in her kitchen while the girls played outside. When had she become so afraid of wanting things? When had happiness started feeling like a luxury she couldn't afford? The house they found wasn't grand. It sat on a quiet street lined with maple trees, a 1920s craftsman with good bones and terrible wallpaper. The paint was peeling, the hardwood floors were scratched, and the kitchen belonged in a museum. But light poured through every window like golden honey, and the backyard had an old swing set that the girls immediately claimed as their own. "It needs work," the realtor said apologetically, as if she were delivering bad news. "It needs love," Amelia corrected, running her fingers along the carved banister of the main staircase. She could picture Emma sliding down it despite all warnings. Grace reading in the window seat that overlooked the garden. Lily playing piano where the morning sun would warm the keys. Ethan found her in what would become their bedroom, standing at the window that faced east toward the rising sun. "What do you think?" he asked, though something in his voice suggested he already knew her answer. "I think," she said slowly, watching the girls chase each other through the overgrown garden below, "I think we're going to need a lot of paint." The renovation became a family adventure in chaos. Emma insisted on painting her room herself, resulting in more pink on Emma than on the walls. Grace approached her space with scientific precision, measuring and remeasuring until Ethan gently suggested that maybe perfect right angles weren't the most important thing in the world. Lily somehow convinced them all to let her paint musical staffs along her bedroom walls, complete with notes that spelled out home in treble clef. The day they painted the kitchen together, Amelia found herself laughing until her sides ached. Emma had managed to get yellow paint in her hair, Grace was lecturing them all about proper brush technique, and Lily was conducting an imaginary orchestra while she worked. Ethan, covered in paint splatters and grinning like a teenager, looked more beautiful to her than he ever had in his expensive suits. "You missed a spot," she told him, dabbing blue paint on his nose with her brush. "Did I?" He grinned and retaliated with a streak of yellow across her cheek. "Paint fight." Emma shrieked with delight, and suddenly they were all laughing and paint-splattered and more of a family than Amelia had ever dared to imagine. In the evenings, after long days of renovation work, they would sit on the living room floor surrounded by drop cloths and paint cans, sharing takeout dinners and planning the next day's projects. Ethan set up a simple recording area in the sunroom where Amelia could teach her piano students, complete with sound dampening panels that he installed himself. Amelia helped him design a small office space where he could work from home more often, choosing warm colors that would make video conferences feel less sterile. But it was the small traditions that made the house feel like home. The girls' height marks penciled onto the mudroom doorframe. Family handprints pressed into the wet concrete of the back patio. A collection of stones from their walks together arranged on the kitchen windowsill. Their first official meal in the completed house was pizza eaten sitting on the living room floor, the dining room table not yet delivered. Emma had insisted they needed candles to make it fancy, so they ate by flickering light while Lily played soft melodies on the piano that had found its perfect place by the front windows. "It's not very elegant," Amelia said, gesturing at their makeshift dinner setup. "It's perfect," Grace declared with her characteristic seriousness. Perfect things don't have to be elegant. Later, after the girls had fallen asleep in their new rooms, Amelia found herself standing in the kitchen doorway, watching Ethan load their few dishes into the dishwasher. The house settled around them with the comfortable creaks of a home ready to hold a family's dreams. "I used to think home was about having the right furniture, the right address, the right everything," she said quietly. He looked up from the sink, soap bubbles clinging to his hands. "And now?" She moved closer, drawn by the warmth in his eyes and the promise of tomorrow in his smile. "Now, I think it's about finding people worth building something with." When he took her hand, his fingers still damp from the dishwater, it felt like sealing a promise. Not just to love each other, but to build something lasting, something strong enough to weather whatever storms might come. "I think we found it," she whispered. And in the gentle silence that followed, surrounded by the evidence of their shared work and shared dreams, Ethan squeezed her hand and smiled. Because sometimes the most profound truths needed no words at all. The invitation arrived on cream-colored paper, formal and elegant, announcing the Riverside Elementary annual spring concert. But tucked inside was something unexpected. A personal note from Mrs. Henderson, the music teacher, requesting that the Hartwell Triplets perform a special piece to showcase the school's commitment to family and music education. Amelia's hands trembled slightly as she read the letter aloud at breakfast, watching her daughters' faces transform from sleepy morning expressions to wide-eyed excitement. Emma bounced in her chair. Grace immediately began planning logistics. Lily smiled that quiet smile that meant she was already composing melodies in her head. "What would you like to play?" Ethan asked, settling into the chair beside Amelia with his coffee, his presence warm and steady in the morning chaos. "We could do that piece we've been working on," Grace suggested, ever practical. "The one about seasons changing." "But what if we mess up in front of everyone?" Emma's excitement flickered with sudden doubt. Lily reached across the table and patted her sister's hand. "We won't mess up because we're together. We sound better together." The weeks that followed became a delicate dance of preparation and anticipation. Every evening after dinner, their living room transformed into a concert hall. Ethan would move the coffee table aside while Amelia adjusted the piano bench and arranged the music stands. The girls would take their positions, Emma with her violin, Grace with her flute, Lily at the piano. Amelia watched them practice with a mixture of pride and protective concern, offering gentle corrections and endless encouragement. "Remember, Emma, the bows should dance, not march. Grace, let your breath flow like a river." Lily, the piano isn't just accompaniment, it's the heartbeat of the song. Ethan found himself learning things he'd never expected to know. The difference between forte and fortissimo, why posture mattered more than perfection, and how music could tell stories that words never could. He became their most devoted audience of one, sitting in the corner of the room night after night, watching his daughters transform from nervous children into confident young musicians. "You're crying again," Amelia teased him one evening after a particularly beautiful run-through of their piece. "I'm not crying," he protested, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "I'm just proud. So incredibly proud." The morning of the concert dawned clear and bright, spring sunshine streaming through their bedroom window like a blessing. But despite the beautiful weather, nervous energy crackled through the house like electricity before a storm. Emma couldn't eat breakfast. Grace organized and reorganized her music folder 17 times. Lily sat at the piano, playing gentle scales to calm herself. And Amelia moved between them all like a conductor orchestrating a symphony of pre-performance jitters. "What if I forget the fingering for the hard part?" Emma worried, practicing air violin in the kitchen. "What if my lip gets tired and I can't hit the high notes?" Grace added, puffing her cheeks experimentally. "What if the piano is out of tune?" Lily wondered, though she was clearly the calmest of the three. Amelia knelt down in front of them, her hands gentle on their shoulders. "What if you're absolutely wonderful? What if the audience falls in love with your music the way I do every single night? What if this becomes one of those magical moments you remember forever?" 2 hours before the concert, Amelia helped them into their performance dresses, navy blue with white collars, chosen because they looked sophisticated without being too grown-up. She braided Emma's wild curls into submission, helped Grace arrange her music folder one final time, and gave Lily a pair of small pearl earrings that had belonged to her own grandmother. "For luck," she whispered, fastening the tiny clasps. It was in that quiet moment, watching Amelia fuss over their daughters with such tender care, that Ethan felt something shift in his chest. He reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "For all of this. For them. For giving us this chance." She looked up at him, and in her eyes he saw not just love, but recognition. They had built something beautiful together. Not perfect, but real and strong, and worth celebrating. The school auditorium buzzed with the excited chatter of families and friends. Ethan and Amelia found seats in the third row, close enough to see every detail of their daughter's performance, but far enough back to let them shine independently. The lights dimmed, conversations faded to whispers, and Mrs. Henderson took the stage. "Tonight, we have a very special performance," she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "Three young ladies who remind us that music is not just about individual talent, but about harmony, cooperation, and the beautiful things that happen when we create together." Emma, Grace, and Lily walked onto the stage with careful steps, their instruments catching the warm stage lights. Emma's violin gleamed like honey. Grace's flute sparkled silver. And Lily, settling at the piano bench, looked like she belonged there, like she'd been born to make music. They began to play, and the auditorium fell into absolute silence. The piece they'd chosen was simple in structure but rich in emotion. A melody that spoke of seasons changing, of growth and transformation, of things that were lost being found again. Emma's violin soared with the joy of spring. Grace's flute whispered like summer breezes. And Lily's piano provided the steady heartbeat underneath it all, grounding the melody in something solid and true. Ethan felt tears streaming. Sometimes life gives us second chances wrapped in most unexpected packages. Ethan's journey reminds us that it's never too late to become the person we were meant to be, the parent our children deserve, the partner who chooses love over pride. But here's the question that lingers. If you discovered you had missed 7 years of your children's lives, would you have the courage to start over? Would you be brave enough to face the woman you left behind, knowing you had no right to ask for forgiveness? Or would you let fear and guilt keep you frozen in the safety of regret? The truth is, we all have moments where we must choose between the comfort of our mistakes and the terrifying possibility of redemption. Ethan chose to show up day after day, not because he deserved a second chance, but because Emma, Grace, and Lily deserve a father who would fight for them. Amelia chose to let love grow in the spaces where resentment once lived, not because the past didn't hurt, but because the future held something more beautiful than revenge ever could. Their story teaches us that healing isn't about erasing our scars, it's about learning to make music with them. As the final notes of their journey fade into silence, we're left with this profound reminder. Families aren't just born through blood or bound by law. They're built through countless small moments of choosing each other, again and again, until love becomes the strongest force in the room. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think about your own second chances, please share it with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to come home. Like this video if you believe in the power of love to heal what was broken, and follow our channel for more stories that remind us of the extraordinary courage it takes to be beautifully, imperfectly human.